After 3 years of no contact, I thought one New Year dinner in Milwaukee couldn't hurt us. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance for my mother to finally meet her granddaughter. We arrived just as the snow started piling up. The dining room was suffocatingly warm, practically vibrating with that old, familiar tension. The polite smiles lasted right up until the appetizers were served. My mother, whose sharp eyes hadn't softened one bit over the years, leaned across the porcelain plates. She turned her gaze to my husband, her voice dropping into that condescending register I knew too well. A firefighter? So you risk your life every day for a paycheck that barely keeps the lights on? The clinking of silverware stopped. The entire table froze in dead silence. Even the soft crackle of the fireplace suddenly felt deafening. I felt my face flush with hot, immediate anger, but before I could snap back, I felt his hand on my knee under the table. My husband didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or defend his honor. He simply placed his knife and fork down, interlaced his fingers, and looked her dead in the eye with a calm that bordered on terrifying. I didn't know it then, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Just 2 days later, what he brought home silenced my entire family for good. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from your own family, subscribe to the channel because you need to hear this. The call came a few nights before New Year's, while Adam was still on shift and Maisie was asleep upstairs. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone on the kitchen counter. The caller ID displayed a name I hadn't seen in 36 months, Barbara. My thumb hovered over the red reject button, my chest tightening with a familiar, suffocating anxiety. But some inexplicable instinct made me swipe green and lift the device to my ear. "Dawn," she said, her tone dripping with a soft, practiced sweetness that immediately put me on guard. "I know it's been a long time, but the new year is approaching, and it's a time for families to start over. Let's put the past behind us. We want you, Adam, and your little girl to come to Milwaukee for dinner." I didn't answer immediately. My mind involuntarily dragged me back to the exact reason we had cut contact in the first place. 3 years ago, she had made it brutally clear that Adam was the wrong choice. To her, being a firefighter and paramedic wasn't a noble calling. It was a reckless, dangerous path that lacked the financial stability she prized above all else. She had spent months aggressively pushing me toward Nolan Reed, a corporate executive with an impeccable pedigree and a bank account matching her lofty standards. She wanted a son-in-law she could brag about at country club luncheons, not one who pulled people out of burning cars. And my father, Howard? He never once raised his voice or directly told me what to do. Instead, he employed his weapon of choice, absolute silence. He stood quietly in the background, offering no support, entirely content to let his wife dictate the terms of my existence. But I wasn't a naive teenager anymore. I was a grown woman, a wife, and a mother, successfully building a life on my own terms. I told her I would think about it and hung up. When Adam finally walked through the front door at 6 in the morning, the faint scent of diesel and ash clinging to his heavy jacket, I poured him coffee and relayed the conversation. He sat at the kitchen island, his exhausted eyes meeting mine. He didn't look angry. "If you want to go, we go," he said, wrapping his large, calloused hands around the warm mug. "I'll support whatever you decide, but I'll tell you this. I am not going to pretend to be ashamed of my profession just to keep the peace at her dinner table." Later, needing perspective, I dialed Marcy Bell. Marcy had always been a grounding force for me. I quickly explained the sudden invitation and my hesitation. She didn't try to make the decision for me, but she offered a piece of clarity. "Going back doesn't mean giving them control again," Marcy reminded me gently. "You are the one holding the cards now." I walked into the living room, watching Maisie play on the rug. She was growing up so fast, and she didn't truly know her grandparents. For her sake, I decided to give them one last chance to be a real family. I pulled our heavy winter suitcases from the hallway closet, unzipped them on the guest bed, and began folding sweaters. The drive to Milwaukee was going to be freezing, but we were going. By the time we reached my parents' street, Milwaukee was already dark and the snow along the curb had turned gray. The imposing 3-story brick house looked exactly as I remembered, projecting an impenetrable image of picture-perfect suburban success. A warm porch light illuminated a thick, frosted pine wreath still proudly hanging on the massive front door. Glancing through the large bay window, I could clearly see the expansive dining room. The long mahogany table was meticulously set with sparkling crystal glasses, polished silver cutlery, and crisp linen napkins. The rich, savory aroma of a roasted holiday meal seeped through the heavy wooden frame just as the door swung open. Barbara stood in the entryway, wearing a pristine cashmere sweater. Before anyone could utter a formal greeting, she bypassed me entirely and scooped Maisie into her arms, hugging her for an uncomfortably long time. She cooed in a high-pitched, melodic voice, playing the role of the flawless, doting grandmother with theatrical precision. My father, Howard, hovered in the background. He finally stepped forward, his posture stiff, and extended a hand toward my husband. They shook hands politely but awkwardly, exchanging brief, generic pleasantries about the terrible driving conditions. Adam remained completely unfazed by the chilly reception. He simply nodded, brushing the melting snow off his broad shoulders, and quietly carried our heavy bags into the foyer. He didn't try to force conversation or overcompensate to impress them. He was simply his usual grounded self. Leaving them behind in the busy hallway, I wandered cautiously toward the formal dining room to set down my purse. That was exactly when I saw it. Resting elegantly against a tall crystal water goblet, right next to the specific seat designated for me, was a perfectly calligraphed name card. It read, Nolan Reed. My stomach plummeted. The sudden realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't a genuine attempt at family reconciliation, it was a carefully orchestrated ambush. Before I could react, a hand grabbed my elbow. It was Tessa, my younger sister. Her eyes darted nervously toward the hallway before she quickly pulled me into the cramped laundry room adjacent to the kitchen. "I'm sorry I didn't warn you," Tessa whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "She invited him weeks ago. She's been telling her friends that you made a mistake, that you could have had a safer life." Tessa looked down at the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I knew she wouldn't stand up for me at the table. Even now, she was entirely paralyzed by her lingering fear of our mother's wrath. The sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the house, cutting our secret conversation short. I stepped out of the laundry room just in time to see the front door open again. Nolan stepped into the bright foyer, brushing snowflakes from the collar of an impeccably tailored, expensive overcoat. He exuded an effortless, wealthy confidence, smiling easily as he handed Barbara a bottle of expensive wine. He didn't act hostile or overly villainous. He was simply a man entirely secure in his privileged world, completely oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the boundaries he was crossing. Barbara immediately began directing traffic, her hands fluttering excitedly as she tried to maneuver Nolan so he would stand directly beside me. Adam watched the subtle choreography unfold. Without a single word of protest, he calmly walked past Nolan, pulled out a heavy wooden chair, and gently lifted Maisie into the seat beside him. "All right, everyone," Barbara announced to the room, her voice ringing out with artificial, triumphant cheer. "Dinner is served. Please take your seats." Dinner started politely, which made every small insult easier for my mother to hide. Platters of perfectly carved prime rib, creamy mashed potatoes dripping with butter, and garlic-tossed green beans were passed around the mahogany table. Maisie was thrilled with her tall flute of bubbly, sparkling cider, feeling like a sophisticated grown-up sitting among the adults. Between bites of rich food, Barbara directed all her glittering attention toward Nolan. She showered him with excessive compliments, loudly discussing his recent corporate promotion at the firm, the impressive architecture of his sprawling new house, and his upcoming luxurious ski vacation in Aspen. She kept repeatedly emphasizing his unmatched ability to secure a prosperous future, frequently throwing pointed, meaningful glances directly in my direction. Then, having sufficiently elevated her preferred guest, she turned her predatory focus to Adam. She adopted a sickeningly sweet tone of faux concern. She probed into his demanding schedule, prying into exactly how many grueling hours he was forced to work. She slyly questioned the recent municipal budget cuts, and how severely they affected his salary, carefully framing her invasive interrogation as deep maternal worry. Adam didn't take the bait. He kept his voice remarkably steady and respectful. He briefly explained his vital role as a firefighter paramedic stationed at a busy downtown station. He spoke with quiet pride about serving the city, keeping his answers concise and perfectly polite, offering her no ammunition. But Barbara didn't need ammunition. Her thin mask of grandmotherly concern suddenly slipped, instantly replaced by raw, unfiltered contempt. She leaned forward, pushing her sparkling crystal goblet aside, and delivered the blow. A firefighter? So you risk your life every day for a paycheck that barely keeps the lights on? The clatter of silver hitting china vanished instantly. The resulting silence across the long table was absolute and suffocating. Howard immediately dropped his gaze, suddenly deeply engrossed in examining a stray green bean on his porcelain plate. Nolan casually took a sip of his red wine, appearing entirely detached from the sudden hostility. Across from me, Tessa visibly tensed, her pale knuckles turning stark white as she gripped her linen napkin beneath the wood. But she remained completely mute. Adam didn't scramble to defend his honor. He deliberately set his heavy silver knife and fork down on the rim of his plate. He leaned back and simply stared at Barbara without offering a single syllable in response. The oppressive tension was finally broken by a small, confused voice. Maisie tugged gently at the soft fabric of my sleeve, her innocent brown eyes wide with genuine confusion. "Mom, does Grandma think Daddy should stop helping people?" A fierce, protective fire instantly ignited deep in my chest. I turned sharply toward the head of the table. "You need to apologize to him right now," I demanded, my voice dropping low but vibrating with absolute fury. Barbara scoffed loudly, waving a manicured hand in the air to dismiss my outrage. "Oh, please, I am simply being realistic. A mother has every right to worry about her daughter's long-term financial stability in this economy. You do not get to disrespect Maisie's father in front of her," I shot back, fiercely refusing to back down. "Not in this house, not anywhere." Her eyes narrowed into dangerous, icy slits. "Don't make a scene," she hissed sharply, deeply offended by my sudden defiance. Before the ugly argument could escalate any further, Adam calmly pushed his chair back and stood up. He gently took our daughter's small hand in his. "Come on, sweetie. Let's go out to the porch and see if we can spot any early fireworks over the city lights," he suggested smoothly, immediately removing her from the toxic crossfire. As I watched the heavy door click shut behind them, a chilling realization washed over me. Barbara wasn't merely attempting to humiliate my husband. By tearing him down in front of her granddaughter, she was actively trying to teach Maisie a twisted lesson, that a man's intrinsic value is strictly measured by wealth. That night, the guest room felt smaller than it had when I was a teenager. Maisie was already fast asleep on a narrow folding cot in the corner, entirely exhausted from the evening's drama. I paced the worn carpet, my arms crossed defensively, firmly telling Adam that I wanted to pack our suitcases and abandon this toxic house immediately. I couldn't stomach the thought of spending another morning under Barbara's roof. Adam sat on the edge of the mattress, slowly loosening his collar. He agreed that we absolutely shouldn't stay there, but he calmly stated he needed to remain in Milwaukee for one more day to handle some official business with the fire department. I paused my pacing, suddenly noticing a thick manila envelope sticking out of his unzipped canvas duffel bag. The bold crest of the Milwaukee Fire Department was clearly stamped in the top corner. When I asked him directly about it, he smoothly deflected, claiming it was just routine station paperwork regarding some outdated training certifications. Normally, I would have relentlessly pushed for a real answer, but the heavy emotional exhaustion of the disastrous dinner weighed heavily on my shoulders. I simply nodded, feeling far too drained to interrogate my own husband. Early the next morning, before the rest of the house was even awake, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was an urgent text from Tessa, begging me to secretly meet her at a local retro diner just a few blocks away. I slipped out of the quiet house unnoticed. I found Tessa sitting in a secluded corner booth, anxiously tearing a flimsy paper napkin into tiny, jagged shreds. Without hesitating, she confessed everything. She openly admitted Barbara had meticulously planned Nolan's sudden arrival. She's been telling the entire country club that you live in constant, crippling anxiety because Adam's job is supposedly so incredibly dangerous, Tessa revealed, shamefully refusing to meet my eyes. She specifically wanted Nolan there to vividly remind you of the comfortable, perfectly safe life you supposedly threw away. But the vicious betrayal actually went much deeper. Tessa swallowed hard, explaining that Barbara had recently intercepted a voicemail from City Hall. The recorded message had confirmed Adam's mandatory attendance at an upcoming formal municipal ceremony. However, Barbara, always eagerly expecting the absolute worst of him, had smugly assumed it was a severe disciplinary hearing or a harsh penalty for workplace negligence. The horrifying truth suddenly snapped into crystal clear focus. My mother hadn't just organized a tense holiday dinner, she had ruthlessly orchestrated a brutal family tribunal. She fully expected Adam to be publicly humiliated regarding his career, and she desperately wanted Nolan waiting proudly in the wings as the obviously superior alternative. "I'm so incredibly sorry I didn't warn you earlier," Tessa cried softly, hot tears spilling onto the sticky formica table. "I was just a massive coward." I didn't reach across the small table to offer her a warm, drawn-out embrace. I was entirely out of cheap forgiveness. I looked directly at my younger sister, my voice completely devoid of any lingering emotion. "Apologies don't miraculously change what happened, Tessa," I said firmly, slowly standing up from the squeaky vinyl booth. "But you can still choose to do the right thing moving forward. That choice is entirely up to you." I left a crumpled $5 bill on the table to cover the black coffee I hadn't touched. I walked out into the freezing morning air, my mind completely clear and sharply focused. I marched straight toward my parked car, fully ready to drive back to that imposing brick house, gather my husband and daughter, and pull them out of there for good. By the time I got back, brunch had already started without me. I walked into the dining room to find Barbara holding court with a few extended relatives who had stayed over. Even now, she couldn't let it go. She was insisting that Maisie needed a father who was home every night, rather than one chasing dangerous thrills. Adam sat quietly at the end of the table, ignoring her venom. He was focused on gently cutting Maisie's pancakes into bite-sized pieces. I stepped into the room, my voice hard. "Stop talking about my husband right now," I demanded. Howard looked up from his newspaper, frowning. "Dawn, please, don't make this meal so tense," he sighed weakly. "The meal became tense the second she decided to use it to humiliate the man I deeply love," I fired back, grabbing Adam's coat from the chair. Barbara slammed her coffee mug down. "If you walk out that door over this, Dawn, don't ever bother coming back," she threatened, her face flushed with anger. "I have absolutely no intention of ever bringing my family back to a place where they are disrespected," I replied with calm. Suddenly, there was a loud scrape of wood against the floor. Tessa bravely stood up from her comfortable chair. She didn't deliver a grand, dramatic speech. She simply picked up her leather purse, walked across the room, and stood firmly by my side, actively choosing us over our mother's relentless control. Within 10 short minutes, we had packed our remaining bags and loaded the cold car. We didn't drive all the way home immediately. The snowy roads were dangerously freezing, and little Maisie was already utterly exhausted. Instead, we safely checked into a warm, quiet hotel located right near downtown Milwaukee. Later that evening, long after Maisie had fallen into a deep sleep, Adam sat quietly on the edge of the hotel bed. He reached directly into his dark duffel bag and finally pulled out that sealed manila envelope. He gently handed it to me. I carefully broke the paper seal and pulled out the heavy cardstock. It was an official, beautifully embossed letter, originating straight from the mayor's office, cordially inviting Adam to a highly formal municipal ceremony to officially receive the prestigious Medal of Valor. The detailed text described exactly how he had courageously rescued Elena Torres and her terrified young son from a horrific, blazing apartment fire during a brutal winter storm last month. I stared blankly at the shiny golden seal, feeling completely stunned. "Why didn't you show her this?" I quietly asked, my voice trembling slightly. "It would have shut her up instantly." Adam gently took the crisp letter back. "Because saving innocent lives isn't a convenient prop," he said softly. "I don't do my difficult job just to desperately win your mother's shallow approval, Dawn." I certainly wasn't going to use Elena Torres and her little boy as a weapon to win some petty argument at a dinner table. In that remarkably quiet hotel room, I looked proudly at the incredible man I married. I finally understood that his steady silence during her brutal attacks wasn't a tragic sign of cowardly weakness. It was a profound display of absolute, unbreakable dignity. Walking away from my incredibly toxic family was definitely the hardest thing I ever had to do, but it successfully taught me a truly vital lesson. You simply cannot force unhealthy people to naturally respect your personal boundaries, but you absolutely possess the undeniable power to fiercely enforce them. True inner strength isn't found in angrily shouting down those who constantly belittle you. It is firmly found in knowing your own undeniable worth, bravely protecting those you deeply love, and having the quiet courage to finally walk out the front door. 2 days after my mother mocked my husband, we walked into Milwaukee City Hall with Maisie between us. The grand auditorium was packed with uniformed firefighters standing shoulder to shoulder in their crisp dress blues, their proud families, local reporters clutching cameras, and dozens of invited citizens filling the oak benches. As we found our reserved seats near the front, I glanced over my shoulder and spotted a familiar group lingering near the heavy wooden doors in the back. Barbara, Howard, Tessa, and Nolan were standing together. Earlier that morning, Tessa had secretly sent them the official event details. She had deliberately ignored our mother's strict instructions regarding family loyalty. She wanted Barbara to finally witness the undeniable truth with her own eyes. My mother had clearly shown up out of morbid curiosity, likely expecting a public reprimand or some humiliating administrative spectacle that would prove her right. The low murmur of the crowd died down as Councilwoman Janet Mills approached the podium. She offered a brief, respectful opening address, formally welcoming the gathered crowd and speaking briefly about civic duty before introducing the next distinguished speaker. Captain Samuel Ortega, a solidly built man with graying temples, stepped up to the microphone. He didn't use flowery, exaggerated language. He spoke about Adam with a grounded, practical respect. He stated plainly that Adam never actively sought the spotlight. He was simply the steady guy who always walked into the burning building when everyone else was desperately running out. Captain Ortega then recounted the horrifying details of the winter apartment fire, giving just enough context without being overly gruesome. He described the suffocatingly thick black smoke that had blinded the rescue teams, the completely unusable interior stairwell engulfed in flames, and how Elena Torres and her young son had been hopelessly trapped on the fourth floor. Elena Torres herself then slowly approached the stage. She leaned into the microphone, her hands nervously gripping the wooden podium. She looked directly at Adam, her dark eyes shining with profound gratitude. Her voice cracked slightly as she told the silent room that her little boy was only alive today because Adam had deliberately gone back into the inferno when absolutely everyone else thought there was zero time left. Sitting beside me, Maisie listened intently. She reached over and tightly gripped my hand, sensing the heavy emotion filling the vast room. Councilwoman Mills returned to present the award. Adam walked onto the stage, his posture straight, and formally accepted the prestigious Medal of Valor as the flashbulbs illuminated the hall. He stepped up to the microphone. The room was pin-drop quiet. Adam looked out over the sea of faces, his gaze briefly passing over the back row before settling on Maisie and me. "Nobody takes this job because it makes them rich," he said, his voice echoing clearly. "We take it because when someone calls, somebody has to come." The entire auditorium instantly erupted into a thunderous, emotional standing ovation. Uniformed men and women leapt to their feet, clapping furiously. It was a powerful wave of genuine, earned respect that money could never possibly buy. Over the overwhelming roar of the crowd, Maisie pointed her small finger toward the stage and announced proudly, her bright voice carrying perfectly, "That's my dad." I slowly turned around in my seat to look at the back of the crowded room. Barbara was completely speechless. Her mouth hung slightly open, her carefully constructed worldview entirely shattered in a matter of minutes. Next to her, Nolan was already quietly slipping out the heavy doors, hurriedly leaving the ceremony early. He clearly had absolutely no desire to be associated with the woman who had foolishly insulted a decorated city hero. After the formal ceremony concluded, people crowded around Adam to shake his hand. As the crowd eventually thinned, Barbara slowly approached us, looking unusually small and profoundly uncomfortable in her expensive cashmere. She tentatively stopped directly in front of Adam, completely unable to meet his incredibly steady gaze. "I didn't know," she stammered weakly, her voice barely a whisper. Adam just looked at her, his expression utterly devoid of any anger, holding only a quiet, impenetrable calm. "You didn't ask," he replied simply. I looked at Barbara standing there, completely stripped of her arrogant superiority, and I finally understood that there was absolutely nothing left to explain to her. The entire city had spoken for him, and we were truly, finally done. The consequences didn't arrive like thunder, they came quietly, one phone call at a time. The local Milwaukee news stations extensively covered Adam officially receiving the prestigious Medal of Valor. Naturally, several wealthy, prominent people within Barbara's tightly knit, elite social circle saw the live evening television broadcast. They quickly connected the incredibly obvious dots, realizing my mother had actively insulted the heroic, decorated firefighter she was supposed to be proudly calling her son-in-law. The resulting social fallout was swift and intensely realistic. Barbara had been actively organizing a high-profile, glamorous fundraising gala dedicated to supporting local first responders. Just days after the ceremony, the board's planning committee politely but firmly asked her to permanently step down from her coordinating role. It didn't entirely destroy her comfortable, wealthy life, but it landed a devastating, humiliating blow to the one thing she truly worshipped: her flawless public image. Other relationships fractured just as fast. Nolan quickly sent a brief, impeccably polite text message stating he had absolutely no desire to be dragged into messy family drama ever again. Meanwhile, Tessa finally rented her own small apartment across town, permanently severing her lifelong financial dependence on our parents' toxic, controlling wealth. My father, Howard, eventually called me, desperately pleading in his usual tired voice to just keep the peace for the sake of holiday tradition. I firmly reminded him that he had been given countless clear opportunities to bravely speak up and defend us, yet he had cowardly chosen comfortable silence every single time. The final breaking point came a week later when Barbara casually texted, selfishly demanding to see Maisie for a weekend visit as if absolutely nothing bad had happened. Sitting at my kitchen table, I typed out my absolute final written response. I explicitly stated that Adam, Maisie, and I were officially severing all contact immediately. I made it unconditionally clear that neither she nor Howard were permitted anywhere near our private home, Maisie's elementary school, the downtown fire station, or any of our workplaces. Then, without a single ounce of hesitation, I permanently blocked both of their phone numbers. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful, desperate apologies, and absolutely no emotional hugs. If this incredibly painful journey has taught me anything, it is that family members do not automatically possess the right to carelessly step into your life simply because you happen to share the same bloodline. Genuine, basic respect is the absolute minimum requirement for a relationship, and you never have to tolerate toxic abuse disguised as maternal love. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my difficult story all the way to the very end. Have you ever been unfairly forced to make the agonizing choice between maintaining a fake family peace and fiercely protecting your own immediate family? Please share your personal thoughts and experiences in the comments section below.